everybody. Nice to see a great turnout. I love that. My name is Nora Suarez Lewis, and I am the Development Associate at the Black Heritage Trail. Welcome to our presenters and to our audience that is here and those that are online. I know that you could have chosen to be anywhere else on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. So we appreciate and thank you for being here with us today for our final key talk, um, a new deal for a great society. And today's title is Envisioning the Future. So I'm glad you're here. Um, I thought there was going to be somebody here from the library, so I'm just going to mention two housekeeping things. Number one, restrooms are upstairs on the second floor, and if you, oh, there's one down here. Oh, good. And just a ladies' one? Oh, okay. Well, there are two operating ones upstairs. And if I can ask everyone to please silence your cell phone, that way you can all have a great hearing experience. So, all right. So, without these, we would not be here, as this program would not be available to us if it weren't for our sponsors. So, I just want to take the opportunity to thank three that have sponsored us today. That is the New Hampshire Humanities, the Mass General Brigham, and final but not least, Merrimack County Savings Bank, who have supported us for this program. We will have our opening. Is there anyone introducing our speakers? Right?
Okay, I'm following this.
Okay, so I'm going to turn that over to you. Do you have a microphone up here? Or do you,
Yes, I have it
you have one
right
up?
here.
Okay. Thanks again. Enjoy the program.
Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. We have Nate Giffard, the Data Director for America Votes, to my right here. And we have Grace Kendika. Kendeka. Yeah. Okay. Program Coordinator at America Friends Service Committee, ACLU. Project Coordinator at Manchester Community Action Coalition. Oh, no.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah. Right. All right. And Jonah Wheeler, New Hampshire State Representative from Peterborough, and actually the youngest male at the State House.
Yeah.
So let me just go back to what else am I supposed to be doing?
Should we introduce ourselves?
All right, I guess it's my turn. Sorry, I missed something. Well, when I was asked to do this, I really did hesitate. That's just the type of person I am. I'm like one of those people that are behind the scene and do all that work, but when it comes to being out here in the open with everyone, I struggle a little bit. But we are here because we're discussing somewhat the New Deal as well as the Great Society somewhat. Can you hear me okay back there? No, somebody was, okay. Louder? Is that better? But I feel like I'm yelling. Okay. So I did a little bit of homework anyway. And the New Deal was a response to the economic depression. It reflected the racism of the era prior to the civil rights movement in American politics. Its legislations focused on relief. Some of that relief was the emergency banking relief, the federal emergency relief, the Work Progress Administration, the National Youth Administration. And I actually learned something with that one because it focused on young people ages 16 to 25, male and female. And there was a Negro Affairs Division led by Mary McLeod Bethune, which I didn't remember that from many, many years ago. They also had the Civilian Conservation Corporation, and that's another one where 18 to 25-year-olds worked on the conservation land, and of course, most of them were of color and underpaid. Then we had the recovery period, and we had Public Works Administration, we had Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and what did I do?
Uh-oh.
Okay, there we go. We had Agricultural Adjustment Administration, we had National Recovery Administration, and we had Federal Housing Administration. And by the way, anyone here that was from the Depression area, or, so we have, yes, the Honorable Harvey Keyes. Anyone else lived during that period of time? Wow. Well, thank you, Harvey, for being here. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. And we also had reform, and that was an attempt to prevent future economic issues. So, and that was the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Social Security Act, the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, and Securities and Exchange Commission. So that focused pretty much on that New Deal and what was happening here in the United States when it was horrible. No place to live, no food, no housing, and all social issues were down the hill. And if you were a color, it was worse. So, Great Society, a response to the persistent problem of poverty and a prosperous economy. It took place during and in response to the Civil Rights Movement under President Lyndon B. Johnson. There was billions set up for the Office of Economic Opportunity at the time. There were billions to develop the Appalachia. There were 2 new cabinet officers, Department of Transportation, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and believe it or not, Robert C. Weaver, the first Black in the cabinet. Big 4, that was the aid to education, medical care for old and poor, immigration reform, new voting rights bills, education aid to students, Medicare for the elderly, Medicaid for poor back in 1965, Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 abolished quota system from 1921. Doubled the number of immigrants allowed annually, 200K. Set limits on West Hemisphere immigrants, 120K. Allowed admission for close relatives of U.S. citizens outside these limits. Latin Americans and Asians mostly started immigrating. And we're sort of going through serious issues now around immigrations, but I like to just keep in our mind that the United States have always been a country for immigrants.
That's right.
Okay, so poverty declined during that time, especially in the elderly, and LBJ speech, We Shall Overcome, Voting Rights Act of 65 again outlawed literacy tests and sent federal voter registers to the South. So I say all that to say that we're in a time now where most of what I just talked about is still happening here in the United States. As a matter of fact, for me, I feel it's worse. I'm a 50s baby, all right? So, and what I came through with Black Panthers and so on, and when I look today at what we're experiencing across the United States and the hate and all that comes with that, I honestly feel as though it's worse than when I grew up in the 60s. So I lead off to say we have a new generation, or another generation, I should say, of a younger generation. And I truly like to hear what you all have to say about where we are today and what you hope to see going forward. Or tell us how we're going to go forward, okay? And I'm going to start off with Nate Giffard.
Giffard.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. So, hi everyone. My name is Nate Giffard. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the data director for America Votes New Hampshire and a long-time and lifelong New Hampshire resident. I was born and raised in Concord, New Hampshire. Can you all hear me in the back? A little louder?
Yeah.
How's this? Yeah? Okay. So today I want to just give you a broad overview of the future that I personally envision for the next 60 years, right? So New Hampshire in the year 2084. Let's see. Yeah? Yeah? Oh? I don't know.
If you like the shoes, just move a little bit. Have a switch.
Technical difficulties.
You want to go down there? And
Yeah, maybe.
just go down there.
Move.
Yeah, that's fine.
Scoot
Oh,
over.
oh, there. We're getting creative, y'all.
Yes.
There we are. Okay. Let's see.
You get to see you twice, Nate.
Yeah.
I know. Stand off to the side. Back up, right? Yeah.
Here.
So it's me, it's not you.
Okay.
Just talk to his name. Just,
Yeah.
Yeah. Just
I'll get it right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, thinking about New Hampshire in 2024. So, I want to first ground us in where we are today. So, reading the description of this session, there's a quote which is in my slide, but I luckily have it here. So, this is a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. He says, "Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds." So King said these words in 1963 from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And this sacred obligation that he's referring to, these are the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as promised by the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and again by the Emancipation Proclamation at the end of the Civil War in 1863. And even though King spoke these words 60 years ago, and progress has definitely been made here in New Hampshire since then, far too many Granite Staters are still waiting for that cash, or to cash that check that they've been promised.
That's right.
And if you go back and you watch the other Tea Talks in this year's series, and I encourage you all to do that, you'll hear from experts in their field about the ways in which Granite Staters are struggling every day. You'll hear about the high cost of living, high cost of rents in cities like Manchester here in Nashua, high cost of food, high cost of clothing, cost of transportation. You'll hear about our failing healthcare system, our underfunded schools, and a criminal justice system that punishes the poor and struggles to reconcile with its implicit biases. And you'll hear about how these issues affect all Granite Staters, but particularly the Granite Staters who look like me, who look like us, Black, brown, indigenous people of color. So now that we understand where we are, we can talk about where I believe we should go and what New Hampshire could look like in the next 60 years. So in the year 2084. So in the year 2084, I imagine that the role of government, much like we saw in the 20th century, I envision that the role of the American government is going to evolve. And innovative models will be implemented to provide services such as universal basic income, universal housing, universal health care, universal internet access, and universal education to ensure that every American has what they need. Civil protections under federal law will also expand to further diminish discrimination based on race, gender, sexuality, and disability, with an emphasis on justice, equity, and accountability. Here in New Hampshire, I envision the seamless implementation of these federal laws and policies, as well as the implementation of innovative New Hampshire-specific solutions to problems such as rural healthcare access and addiction treatment. Under this future government, every New Hampshire child will sleep in a safe home and have equitable access to nutritious meals, the internet, and education through the college level, and comprehensive health care simply for being a U.S. citizen. And in the State House in Concord, our state legislature will continue to be one of the largest legislatures in the world. It will be a champion of democracy and the democratic process, and it will pass progressive legislation to ensure the safety, security, and longevity of our state. In 2084, the population of New Hampshire will increase to 1.5 million residents. Cities like Concord, Manchester, and Nashua will still be the state's major population centers, but we will see the largest growths in populations in places like Bedford, Merrimack, and other suburban towns in the I-93 corridor. And we will start to see small towns in the Lakes region and North Country, think places like Laconia, Littleton in the North Country, rapidly expand and become cultural and economic hotspots in the state. Industries such as healthcare, education, and manufacturing will continue to be the backbone of our state economy. And there will also be policies in place to attract a more diverse workforce, including young people and BIPOC, to the state. To accommodate this growth in population and industry, I envision a ubiquitous implementation of renewable energies, carbon capture technologies, and sustainable agriculture and forestry across the state. While these technologies will mitigate further climate destabilization, we will still see the effects of climate change. It will be most notable in our eroding coastline, extreme weather events, and in a growing list of extinct species. However, we will take these threats much more seriously than we do today, and there will be a collective effort to ensure that all Granite Staters are guaranteed the right to clean air, clean water, and clean food. In 2084, I will be 85 years old, and I will still look great. I envision exponential advancements in technology and medicine that will lead to the cures for many common diseases that we face today, and an increase in the average lifespan. And technological advancements such as these will be far-reaching here in New Hampshire. Artificial intelligence and automation will play a central role in our lives and replace most task-based jobs. Only jobs that require creativity or more complex problem solving will be done by humans. All forms of transportation will be fully electric, with charging stations from Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, all the way down here to Nashua. And a comprehensive rail system will run through the southern tier of the state to connect commuters and travelers to major cities like Boston. And all of these systems will be integrated into a fully updated and resilient power grid. In closing, I am optimistic about the future of New Hampshire. I've already seen it change for the better in many ways, and I know that it will continue to change with our collective effort. In 2084, the 2084 that I envision is within our reach, but it won't happen by itself, and it won't happen without our collective movement. Each of us must ask ourselves, what kind of New Hampshire do I want to live in, and what am I willing to do to make that happen? Let's hold our elected officials accountable, let's get involved in our local communities, and let's refuse to be complacent about the world around us. Together, let's build a future that we all deserve. Thank you.
Okay, our next presenter will be Jonah Wheeler.
Okay. Well, hello everybody. I am Jonah Orion Wheeler. I'll come join you. I can't be up on the stage. My name is Jonah Orion Wheeler. I'm one of the 400 state representatives alongside my good friend Linda Harriet Gothright right here, my caucus leader and ranking member of the Criminal Justice Committee. And we are joined by Fran Nutter-Upham back there at the back, and I know that there are, and Sue Elberg, I knew that you were here, Sue, somewhere. And we have a great team of representatives up there that do great work. I've lived here my entire life. I was born and raised in Keene, born in a bathtub in Keene, as I like to say, Elberg. And I love this state. I grew up a working poor individual to a single mother who worked as hard as she could to meet ends meet. She didn't have that strong family connection. She had a lack of community. We had to build it ourselves. We had to find community in the town in which we lived. In a rural community with 7,000 people, and people think, we're New Englanders. We don't, we have that brush New England kind of rugged attitude. But through that attitude, we were able to find a group of friends that kept us above water our entire lives. And we lost our housing. We did move around a little bit, lived in Seattle for about a year, moved to Maine for 3 months after that, but came back and never left Peterborough, New Hampshire. And that was about in 2nd grade. And through that experience, we found community. We found those people that gave us the sense that we're going to be okay. We're in a tough situation here in the United States of America. Let's just be blunt about it. Every single one of us know it. You don't need a 21-year-old to tell you that. No matter what your political beliefs, we're in a tough situation. We've got both sides of the aisle saying that this is an existential election, that the nature of our country is at stake in many ways that it is. But folks, that existentialism has existed for a long time. And us who have been here in this room, who have experienced what has happened in the last 40, 50, 100 years in this country since the Civil War, understand how rough it has been for the majority of people in this country for a long time. If you're a working class person, you don't feel as though anyone is there for you, because for that last 40 years, your wages have stayed stagnant. You've seen the political situation get worse, more divisive, less attached to the reality in which we're seeing on the ground every day. You've seen the systems, the healthcare systems, the education systems, the military, the systems of government, which are supposed to serve us, do everything but. You've seen them take the spirit that people have for the love of this country, the love that people feel, and this has been going on since just about World War II, taking poor people who love this country, who want to serve it, telling them, join the military. People who believe that the people at the top are making the right decisions, and then sending those poor people off to countries that never attacked us, never threatened to attack us, only to impose an economic reality on those people. Us who have served in the military, and I come from a military family, understand that very well. The people who are in charge have failed us. It's not our fault as voters. It's not because the voters voted for this person or that person. It's their fault as the people who have all the power in the world, the greatest country on the face of the planet. More wealth than any country has in the history of the world. More power than any country has had in the history of the world. More military prowess than any country has had in the history of the world. And yet, many of us live underwater, as if there is nothing. Many of us live with our freedoms stampered, with our light not shining. But through that, we find community. That tough situation, it feels impossible. It feels like we're never going to get out of it. And I remember I was a 17-year-old. I doom scrolled the internet. I know what it's like to be a young person looking at the internet and thinking that it's never going to change. But I also am, as far as I can say, a student of history. And I know that those people that experienced the plight of the civil rights movement didn't necessarily feel like it was easy. The women who fought for suffrage didn't necessarily feel like it was easy. The people who fought for abolition, like Senator John P. Hale, who served as Speaker of the House here in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, the others who came here from New Hampshire, Daniel Webster, the other anti-slavery senators, and the rest of that movement, I don't think the abolitionists necessarily felt like it was easy to break the hold that the slaveholders had on the greatest industry that had been created in the history of the country up until that point. It's never easy to break free of oppression, and it never has been. But in this moment, where, as Nate said, where people are feeling destitute, you look outside. I walked into this library. There was a man sleeping right outside on the concrete, but most of us, we just walk past. Oh, that's just homelessness. No, that's not how it has to be. We don't have to drive past veterans, homeless veterans, standing on street corners asking for a few bucks just to get by to the next day. We don't have to accept the reality that there are people on our parks overdosing because they can't accept the fact that they're stuck in the mud, never able to get out. This country is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And we have a spirit in ourselves as Americans, as people, to help one another. We do help each other in many ways. It is the people in power, the systems, that are not engaging with that. As much as I can as a 21-year-old, I'm in the legislature, and I'm fighting to get those systems working for us. But at the end of the day, the reality is things might get tough. And that's an understatement. Where every metric, whether you want to look at the markets, the debt that people are holding, this is not going to be an easy decade that we're going into. The comforts that we have enjoyed for the last 40 years have run their course. And eventually, as anybody can tell you, and as people have written in the scriptures and in good fantasy stories and good novels and the Aesop's fables of the past, you reap what you sow. It's truth of the reality in which we live. We have sown division and hate and destruction, and we are reaping that right now. But the spirit of the humanity inside all of us is not hate and division nor destruction. It is love. That is the spirit in all of us. The spirit that we feel looking at our child. That's the spirit of humanity. The spirit that we feel when we want to protect the country in which we live, the people in which we live. That's the love of community. And I don't have any answers for you. I was told to envision the future in 10 minutes. I don't know necessarily how to do that. But what I can do in the 10 minutes that I had here before you is tell you to love. Tell you to be in community with people as much as you can. Things are going to get hard. It's not going to be an easy decade. And I mean that in the strongest terms. I don't have to get into it, but we will all face it in these next 10 years. Through that toughness, we have to hold the spirit of the people who came before us, the ancestors that live among us and that came before us, the people that faced impossible situations and decided to still get it done, the Davids which faced the Goliaths, the people who, despite all the odds, continued to march on. That's what we have to do. And that isn't found through an election of one person or the other, or a TV show, or a good book, or a specific set of theory. It is found through the small moments of humanity that we experience in everyday reality. The small moment, the small choices that we have to either help a person or not help a person. And if we make the decision in all those small moments to help the person, then I am confident that our world will be better. Because I think at this moment, we have chosen to ignore our human spirit, chosen to cast it aside in favor of our technological, human, next level reality that we're entering with the artificial intelligence and everything that we have before us. But let us not be disconnected from that which has brought us to this point. Let us connect ourselves even further to that which brought us to this point. Be the human beings which the ancestors asked us to be, which God has asked us to be. Stand strong in our humanity. Embrace those moments of love, those moments where we can either help a person or hurt a person by helping people. And when choosing leaders, look for people with courage, with conviction, with principle. Don't look for the mealy-mouthed, oh, he's nice to everybody. A person who's nice to everybody is a friend to nobody. And too long, we have had leaders that have chosen to support business, to support the, for lack of a better term, elite in our society. Those with great wealth and power. The very few, the top 0.001% of our society have bought out both parties. We see that at the State House, as a matter of fact. We see that in the federal Congress. We all know that. And we see that in administrative levels, at every level, the labor department, all these things. Folks, we need to choose leaders who are willing to break free of that, who are willing to be courageous in their pursuit, willing to give up their lives in the pursuit of public service to break free the empire that has entrenched our country, to restore America to the republic which it can be. That's not going to come from a mealy-mouthed waffler. It's going to come from somebody and a group of people, a movement of people, willing to say enough, to stand up strong with their back up straight, their voice on fire, willing to face the fire, willing to face the hatred which will come from the very powerful forces. And when we think about the New Deal, I think about what brought us to the New Deal, the speculative nature of those in power in the 1920s that led to the 1929 stock market crash. What happened in 2008, folks? The same exact thing. We let the regulatory agencies just close their eyes and not focus on it, and we let both parties deregulate the entire thing. And what happened in 2008? It wasn't an accident. It was speculative, frankly, evil behavior that led to all of us losing our houses, our mortgages, our money. We're still recovering from that. But who isn't recovering from that? The new 150 billionaires that have been created in the last 10 years. The fact that we have more billionaires in this country than any other country. They're doing fine. Amazon's doing fine. They're not paying taxes. Facebook is doing fine. They're not paying taxes, and they're spying on every single one of us. Folks, we need people who are willing to stand up to this. We need smart, energetic, young people who are willing to stand up to this. And when we have that, I'm confident that we will break free of the empire in which we live. Because empire is only as good as its people. And right now, the emperor has no clothes. They've spent all the money. They've overextended the military. We, as the American people, have power. And it's our time to take back that power as human beings willing to say enough to the reality in which we see every day. Yes. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to doing it with every single one of you. Times are tough, but we're going to get through it. The phoenix will rise from the ashes.
That's right.
Thank you, Jonah. We're going to move on to Grace Hindiki.
All right, thank you so much. Can y'all hear me in the back? Wonderful. I have no problem projecting my voice. So if I start to go a little bit low, let me know. And it's a hard act to follow, these amazing thinkers, leaders in our community, but I'll do my best to share with you how I envision our future. So yes. A little bit about myself. My name is Grace Kandeke. My pronouns are she, hers. I am an immigrant and I'm an American. I was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I came to the United States when I was 2 years old. So I know many people, I see a lot of familiar faces. I'm sure folks have heard this story before, but for folks who don't but for folks who don't know me well, I grew up in Manchester. So Manchester, New Hampshire is my hometown. I've lived here since I was a toddler. I went to school here, and I really suffered, unfortunately, living here. It was very difficult. I had the opportunity when I graduated from high school to leave New Hampshire. I lived in Boston for a number of years, and I had, to be completely honest with you, no intention of coming back. I thought I would leave behind the trauma, the difficulties, the pain, the sense of isolation and disconnection that I experienced here, being both African, being, too African for Black people, too Black for African people, and too all of that for white people. So when my husband and I decided to move back, we were looking for a home to buy, to set down roots, to create our family, and the realities of gentrification, the realities of what was affordable in the Boston area, which was nothing for us, forced us. And the fact that our parents were aging really forced us to reconsider my plan to never come back to New Hampshire. And we ended up back here in 2018. And I was terrified. I will tell you that right now. I was absolutely scared because I really really thought that I was going to come back to the same sense of helplessness, of isolation, feeling a lack of community, feeling a lack of connection that I had worked so hard to put behind me. I had created a community in Boston. I was terrified to leave it. But I came here and I saw a state transformed. I saw the elders that I remember seeing in meetings with my mom, who was a community organizer and a community leader, working with working with a new wave of young people. And people who sometimes people don't believe me, but I am actually closer to 40 than I am to 20. But seeing people even younger than me stepping up and really starting to shape and shift New Hampshire to really be a state that reflects and is able to support and to enable them and their loved ones to thrive. And so I want to talk a little bit about when I think about envisioning a New Hampshire that works for all people, when I envision a future where we can use the lessons of the New Deal to really think about what is it that we now want for ourselves. And I just wanted to make note of a couple of things that the New Deal really shifted. I mean, the New Deal was a paradigm shift in terms of both the ways that government was made responsible for direct intervention into communities. It created Social Security, this program that is lambasted, that we're always fighting to maintain. It created works programs that built bridges, that created offices, that built murals. I mean, that literally built so much of the infrastructure that I think that we take for granted because we don't know that history. And more than anything, it changed the political landscape. It changed the political landscape of the Democratic Party, bringing in more African Americans into the party, bringing in farm workers, people who were in many ways very marginalized from the political system. But it wasn't perfect. No government program can be, right? It did leave out sharecroppers. It left out domestic workers, and many of these workers being mostly Black. But what it did do for workers, that it created the conditions for unions to emerge. They created more support for unions to become more powerful, to have more of a say, to be able to protect and enable people to be able to fight for their rights, to be paid adequately, and to be able to work in safe conditions. So all of that contributes to now the landscape the economic landscape, the political landscape, the social landscape that we are most familiar with now. And it's certainly, the program has been lambasted. I mean, it like I said, it was not without fault. But what it did is that it created in our society a recognition that government has direct responsibility to its people. And what does that responsibility look like? Now I think as a nation, as a state, we are fighting about what does it mean for government to be responsible? What does it mean when we want, on one hand, small government, less interference, but on the other hand, we know that without government interference, people's rights get eroded. People are not able to access the resources that they need. People simply do not have a means to change the social and economic fabric of our society without being able to directly influence government. And so when I'm thinking about our future, I think about, with the work that I do with the American Friends Service Committee, we are, for folks who may not know us, we are a Quaker organization, a little over 100 years old. The New Hampshire program where I work is about 50 years old. We celebrate our 50th anniversary next year. And we have been working in all that time, in very many ways, quietly behind the scenes, to enable people, New Hampshire people, to be able to fight for their rights, to be able to create policies that actually lift up the humanity and the dignity of people, in particular, those who are the most marginalized, were those people who are immigrants, who are formerly and currently incarcerated, people who are workers, our students, and our low-income community members, and most certainly our BIPOC community members. So we work from a framework of divest, invest, that we divest from systems of policing and surveillance and incarceration that do not do the things that we need them to do in order to create safety, in order to create opportunity, in order to solve the biggest problems that we have in our society, and instead instead to use our resources to invest in the care infrastructure that we truly need. When we went, I mean, it's hard to believe that the pandemic was in 2020, 2021. It was just a few years ago, and in many ways we're still living it, even though it seems from, from popular media that the pandemic is over. But we know our disabled loved ones, our loved ones who are ill, and people who are, must care for themselves, or others who are medically vulnerable, are still very much living in the reality that the pandemic is ongoing. But when the pandemic was at its height, there were programs that were created in order to enable people to be able to pay their rent, to assist with rent, to be able to pay utility bills. And what that enabled for us, I'm not a policy scholar like our friends at New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, who I highly recommend if you to read their work, to read their research, to understand that the pandemic relief programs enabled us to keep most people farther out of poverty than we would have had if we didn't have those programs. And yet now, most of those programs have now become defunct, and people are sliding back because there isn't a social safety net strong enough to hold people together. And instead, what safety nets we have has big holes, so people fall through the cracks continuously. So the work that I do with AFSC encompasses a wide range of things. But one of the things that we have worked on as an organization is our own vision of a 10-year vision, which we're about halfway through now, of a New Hampshire that works for all people. And our 2030 vision, so just a little bit shy of 2084. So this will help us to, what do we need to get there? And then what do we need to get even further, right? And our vision is that New Hampshire people are equipped and able to experience equity, security, peace, and in opportunities to thrive. Very, very basic. But again, if we link that back to the vision and the paradigm shift of the New Deal, we recognize that, again, there was this real change in what we believed people were entitled to. Before, socially, we thought, well, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and if you fall, then it's your own dang fault, and good luck. Hope the dirt doesn't taste too bad. But we as a community have shifted in our belief, recognizing that each one of us, simply because we exist in this world, simply because we are human beings alive amongst other human beings, deserve the same basic things as anybody else. We all need housing, healthcare, opportunities for education, right? Transportation, adequate wages, living wages to be able to care for us and our families. If we're going to be living in a society that requires us to make money, then let us all be able to make enough money. We're not talking billionaires. We're just talking basic amenities, basic things that we should all be able to access, right? Food, water, shelter. And so as we're thinking about how do we create this world, how do we, as we continue to move, and sometimes it can feel like so much of the work is just in being able to convince other people that other people deserve the same things as we do, that other people are people. But we live in a society that throws people away. We criminalize, we label, and once you receive certain labels, you are no longer part of the human family. You are no longer worthy or of value or entitled to any of those basic needs or resources. But that is not true. That is a falsehood that we have over and over again have perpetuated, but we know that that is not true. Even if I do not know you, you are human. You deserve what I deserve because we need the same things to live. We may not have the same paths, but we need the same basic things to live. And so we believe that in order for us to reach that, I mean, hopefully by 2030, but the work continues. We need both movement, a strong, robust movement, and we need systems change. And in order to get systems change, we need that movement. They work interchangeably. And so we believe in order to have that movement, that strong, effective movement, we need people who are able to take coordinated and effective action, who are diverse, who bring together so many of us from different backgrounds, who hold different identities. One of the parts of discourse that I find the most hilarious is what we now are calling identity politics, as if politics has never ever been about identities. It's always been about identities, right? We know that. But recognizing that the diversity of identities enables us to understand what different people need. And if we design our programs, our systems, our infrastructure to meet the most basic needs of those who are the most vulnerable, we all benefit. It is as simple as thinking about our design of sidewalks. If we design sidewalks so that anyone who is in a wheelchair, who is in an assistive device can use it, then we're talking people with baby carriages, people who may have had, my husband had just broke himself quite terribly, is in a boot to be able, and it would just make it easier even for people who are able-bodied to be able to walk with ease, right? So when we design for the most vulnerable, we design for all of us. So I'm seeing that I'm out of time, so I'll just leave with this, which is that we must always recognize the ways that we divest and invest. In New Hampshire, our budgets and elsewhere are moral documents. What we have seen over this past year is that money going to northern border enforcement, money going to increase policing, money going to increase surveillance, while New Hampshire communities are crying for some basic things. Substance misuse treatment, broadband access, housing, and the like. And so we must always be working together to really be focusing on both where do we divest from in order to invest in the infrastructure that we need to care for all of us. So thank you for giving me this time.
Good job. Michelle?
It's Nora. It says Michelle on your sheet. Michelle's like, it's Nora.
Okay, Nora? Sorry.
Thanks, Nora.
Go right ahead.
Am I introducing the question?
Oh, no. It's guidelines.
Yeah, we can't. My computer.
Okay.
Just go ahead.
So this is the part where we have questions and our panel should have answers, hopefully. So I'll bring the microphone around. We don't have the slide for the rules for engagement, but basically what I remember is be crisp, be kind, be concise, and make space for other people. So if you could follow that, that would be great. So who has a question?
I want to thank the panelists. You guys was great. But in some less than 2 minutes, can you envision your future with the audience? What do you see in your own words, your help for the future? Let's say 5 to 10 years.
Repeat the question, please.
What is your envision of the future?
Okay, let's start with I'm sorry.
Can't hear you.
Nate,
What is the vision?
hold it.
What is the vision of your future for the next 5 years?
Yeah.
Nate.
So for me personally, so in my day-to-day work is in data. So I work for America Votes as the data director. And so, sorry. Can you hear me now? All right. So my work is in data. And so in 10 years, I envision that, I'll have helped to create systems that allow people like Grace to do their work every day. So making sure that they have access to things like the voter file, making sure that they can target folks effectively when they're running their program, and that they can make the change that they want to make in this world, and that it benefits everyone.
And the Honorable Wheeler?
Okay. It's a tough question, Gloria. I have to be honest with you. I speak to my friends that are not politically engaged. I speak to elderly members of the community and people from every background. Right now, I don't think people feel like has been present in other eras of human civilization, a faith in the future. And frankly, I think it's warranted. We're looking at a situation where the world could be very chaotic in these next, you asked me what I think the next 5 to 10 years will look like. I think very chaotic. I'm going to be on, I'm not going to lie to you guys. Things do not look good. What I do know is that, and I know this from my childhood, I went through a very tough childhood, but we adapted, we survived, we thrived in the community that we built together. Potlucks, the knowledge that we had as human beings, cooking, the survival knowledge that we had. It's moments like that that make me confident that at least those people, the people that have had to be on survival mode for so long, and that's frankly 160 million of us in this country, people living paycheck to paycheck right at the poverty line, those people will be in large part okay because they have had to survive for so long. I'm not optimistic about the next 5 to 10 years, but I am optimistic about the long-term future because I know that we will build back stronger and we will build a world that actually works, that's in symphony with the planet that we live on, that's not against it. We will build systems that work in the planet that we live on, not against it. And through that, we will find sustainability and a future. But like I said in my talk, I mean, there's no tiptoeing around the issue. And at this point, I don't think we can avoid it. Things are going to be very tough in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think a lot of young people feel apathetic or with a lack of faith or that people aren't responding to that because no one is necessarily willing to say that. It's a tough reality to face, but I think that's where we are.
So my answer is a little bit more personal. So the future I envision for myself is one where my retired mother can stop working in 5 years, where my sister, who cannot afford to live by herself and is currently living with me, can finally spread her wings and fly and be able to earn enough money to care for herself as well and to live on her own. I envision a future where my newly born nieces and nephew can walk down the streets of New Hampshire and not feel afraid to encounter police. That they know that whatever interactions they might have, that their voice would be enough to hold back any violence or any threats to their life. I envision a future where I have so much family back home in Congo. And for many immigrants, I think we understand this, that we don't just live here in our adopted countries. We also live back in our home countries. We still stay connected to those families. And so I envision a Congo that is at peace. I envision a Congo that is beginning to do the work of rebuilding so that people are not more afraid that they will be killed or that their towns or villages will be razed to the ground. I envision a country that is able to recognize our direct role in injustices across the country, is able to look at our own hypocrisy when it comes to our international policies, our security policies, the ways that we treat people trying to come here for safety, and that we recognize that we have a responsibility to the rest of the world, not only to uphold our own interests, to continue to be great again, well, we all know what that means, but to truly help to build a world that works for all, and that we would use our great power for that. So I have a lot of hope because I work with people like you sitting in the audience who not only ask these questions, who show up to do the work, who show up personally to care for, to celebrate, and that if we can continue to do that and we can continue to bring people in who are left behind, who are left out, then we have always been the majority, but then we can actually feel our power and we can change that. So I envision a hopeful future that has all of us doing the work that we need to be honest and to create what we need.
I have a question. I hope Mr. Keys will give me a moment to ask it. In deferring to my elder here, I'd love to ask this question. Nate, this one's for you.
Sure.
You painted a very optimistic utopian view of America in the year, what year, 2020?
2084.
2020, whatever.
84.
2084.
Yeah.
And my question is, what have you seen in the data that you're looking at that gives you that optimism?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So, similar to what Jonah has said, right? I think that it is going to be a tough road, right? We've seen the divisiveness, we've seen our systems collapsing around us, but at the same time, we see young people who care, right? We see young people who are seeing our systems collapse and saying, that is not enough for us. We want more, right? And so that's what's giving me the optimism, right? We're seeing that, yes, we are in a tough spot, but at the same time, we live in America. We live in the wealthiest country in the world. We live in a place where we have the resources where we can dream big, where we can do these grand things and make sure that everyone has what they need. And so that's what gives me that optimism. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Am I next? Thank you. I am so excited to see all these young people talk about what tomorrow will bring and what the future brings. I will say this to you: the future is now, not 10 years from now, not 30 years from now. Today is the most segregated city or time in New Hampshire. There are white churches and black churches. When are we going to stop being hypocritical? We can't go forward this way. When are we going to stop putting ourselves in boxes, black and white? I can't fight out of a black box and embrace the world and in humanity. I can't fight out of a white box and embrace humanity. We have to get rid of the boxes. My elder on the right said, so you're supposed to ask the question.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we are here. Let me say this to you, and maybe I'll ask the question. If we want something that we've never had before, we must do something that we've never done before. And that is work today to come together and get out of the boxes. And tell me this: how do we get out of the boxes of black and white in New Hampshire on Sunday morning? Thank you very much.
I think that's a great question, Harvey. I totally agree. You know, we have to get out of those boxes, and I've seen in the state legislature, you know, there are those moments. I mean, you know that as a former representative yourself, Mr. K. Everyone's going to make a couple of comments. I mean, we know that as people just living today, but we're stronger than those comments. And if we approach people with humanity, then they will treat us with that humanity back. And you know, everybody in the State House could have written me off on day one. And they probably did in a lot of ways, right, Linda? But we saw a 19-year-old with dreadlocks, with a very strong message, who beat somebody who had been in that legislature for 8 years and somebody who had been in there for 26 years. A fluke. That must have been a fluke. They wrote it off. But in treating those people not, oh, I'm better than them, so they must live with respect, in approaching them with honor, in understanding that all you have up there is your word, and I think that's true across the board. It doesn't matter if you're in the legislature or if you're working at Dunkin' Donuts. All that matters is that you have your word, what you say. If what you say means nothing. If you go around and tell everybody what they want to hear, then people will feel that. People feel when they're being BS'd. And I think if you operate on truth, on principle, then people will treat you with that humanity. And that's what they did in the civil rights movement. They committed to nonviolence, to peace. Martin Luther King, at the end of his life, he talked about the fact that he felt he had led people into a burning house. The quote was, "I've integrated my people into a burning house." He was talking about the fact that he had integrated people into a movement that doesn't seem to actually be fighting for them. Speaking about Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, talking about how it was alleviating of the pain that people were feeling, but alleviation is not healing. And Dr. King understood very clearly that what we needed was a poor people's march that focused not on whether you're black, or you're white, or you're this, or you're that, who you love, what you are, but the content of your character, the humanity that you hold. And he, right before he was shot, days before he was shot, was about to lead a march of millions of people onto Washington to demand that the Congress respect that as well. It wasn't just black poor people that Martin Luther King was fighting for in those last few days of his life. And he made this very explicit, and you can look at his last few speeches. You can watch the mountaintop speech, his last speech. He was very explicit about the fact that this has to be a movement where we step outside of those boxes, because it's not just black poor people that are having a problem. And he had fought his whole life for this and finally realized, oh my God, this is about class. This is about the fact that we are stuck not in black or white or Indian American or Native American boxes, but we're stuck in economic boxes. There are people, black people, who are perfectly rich and powerful and living comfortably. We all know those people. We're in a situation where we have to treat people with that humanity and as human beings living in the same class, because none of us, I don't think, are the top 0.001%. So we're all in the same boat. We have to have leaders that speak to the fact that we're in the same boat, stop and think outside of these divisions and become one human family. That's how we're going to come outside of those boxes.
Thank you.
And I would just add, I think it's really, so I'm not a churchgoer. I was raised Catholic, but I'm no longer a member of the church. But I think about the ways that we all spend our Sundays, right? Whether we go to church or we don't, we're spending some of our Sunday here together, right? And I'm seeing a very multiracial room. We spend our Sundays with friends, with family, at home, maybe in our neighborhood. How many of us know our neighbors? How many of us talk to our neighbors? How many of us spend any time with our neighbors, right? I come from a multiracial family. My husband is mixed race, so his family is mixed. And so our families together are a combined multiracial family. And what I have seen is that our movement, or what we do collectively, boils down to what we choose to do individually. Who do we spend our time with? Who do we bring into our inner circles? Who do we professionally spend time with? And I think it is important to recognize, I have the immense privilege, it's not always felt like a privilege, I'll be honest with you, of being both Black and African, which is all, I see it all as one, but being both immigrant and American. And because I've had to struggle with not necessarily being accepted in either one of those groups because of my own cultural differences, because of that melange that has, shaped itself into me, I have had to find ways to still be able to build community and connection with others. And what I have found is that when we do boil it down to humanity, when we're able to recognize that our liberation is tied together, that what we're fighting for is integrated, it's a matter of solidarity. So even if I may not be, I fight for my trans brothers and sisters and siblings, not because I am trans, but because they are human beings. Because there are people who I love And whether or not I have a direct relationship with them, it doesn't matter, right? Because again, we're fighting for people to be able to live freely. So I think to answer your question, Harvey, about like how do we break out of those boxes, I think we really have to recognize what boxes we individually are living in, and that understanding the construct of race and how it influences socially, politically, enables us to then be able to work. We cannot eradicate it ourselves, but we can work to see how it manifests in our own lives and then do that work individually, because that work does have a snowball effect, to really think about who do I spend time with, who do I love, who do I hold in high regard. Do I just have that one person of color? Do I just have that one queer person in my life? Do I have no people like that in my life? Or am I really spending time within my community, my neighborhood, branching out in who I spend time with, to really be able to say that I am not living in the box of my own making?
Oh.
Great.
And I think my fellow panelists have summarized it pretty well, and I agree with everything that's been said. I would just underscore this idea of reflecting on yourself and, like Grace is saying, reflecting on who you are and the communities around you, bridging those gaps between communities, and really thinking about collective liberation. Right? Rising tide lifts all boats. That's what I think of.
Good job.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
Not true.
Unless it has holes in it.
Rising tide raises all boats that are in the water.
That's also true.
The boats are not in the water.
That's right. Yeah. Right. So help your neighbor get their boat into the water.
Yeah.
And then a rising tide will lift all boats.
Great job. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm not sure if you hear me.
Where?
Right here in the middle.
Okay, so my question is, I know these times are rough, but if we are not in politics normally and we want to help people and we want to make things happen, how can we help you? Like what causes, what things, what groups, how can we help make a change? Because yes, I can talk to my neighbors, I can have a positive attitude, but sometimes I feel like I don't know what else I can do to improve things so that we don't keep going back and keep losing civil rights and what's going on today.
Absolutely.
I mean, what associations, what can we do to support you as a politician and activists?
One of the things you can do is you can join the NAACP. As Gloria said, the Greater Nashua Area Branch NAACP, we have membership envelopes here. There's also a branch in Manchester, and there's a branch in the Seacoast. And we're activists, and we work on all of those issues. So come and join us. That's one way to do it.
If you're interested in the Seacoast NAACP, come and see me, and I'll make sure that you sign up.
So, oh, yeah, can we just answer? Yeah, so I would say, so I'll take this first and then I'll toss it to my fellow panelists. So I would say, so first, one thing that we at AFSC, so first thing I would say is if you have internet access, please go to afsc.org/StateHouseWatch. We publish a weekly newsletter giving updates about what's happening at the State House. If you're just curious and wanting to just kind of stay plugged in to what policies are making their way through the State House. But I would say even more so, please be involved locally. Like sometimes I feel like, sometimes it's like, be careful what you wish for, because once you get involved in the activist community, it's like a tidal wave. But there are so many groups, and one of the ways, again, if you sign up for our newsletter or read it online, you'll be able to. We often will put in events as well as bill updates, information about what's moving through New Hampshire at the state and local level. Locally, please go to your city council, your aldermanic board, whatever your city leaders call themselves, to connect with kind of like what's going on with your city, because we have the most influence politically at our local level. And it is incredible in particular because New Hampshire is so small. Your politician is your neighbor, is the person working in Market Basket, is, the person walking their dog. We are so close to each other in that particular way. But if there are specific areas of issues that you're interested in, please come talk to me. I don't want to take up too much airtime, but please come talk to me. I'd love to connect you with, if you're interested in environmental stuff, 350 New Hampshire. If you're interested in LGBTQ rights, Granite State Progress. If you're interested in immigrant rights, AFSC, Granite State Organizing Project, the ACLU. They're not necessarily, anyway, ACLU. I don't want to be like, please, they're not going to, anyway, I'm just being awkward. But there are many different groups and coalitions that work together. So please feel free to come talk to me or shoot me an email. I think we'll share contact information, or I'll give contact information, because there's so many different ways to plug in. It really depends on what you're interested in. And even if you may feel like you might be alone in this, like, guarantee you there's a group, large or small, formal or informal, that's working on those issue areas.
Oh, good job.
Absolutely.
And just to add to that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just to add to that, right, participating at the local level is, I think, the most important thing that you could do, right? You said that, you can talk to your neighbor, but you don't know how to get involved, but that is how you get involved, right? Talk to your neighbor, figure out what issues your neighbors finds important, what issues the people across the street, down the road from you find important, right? Building that community, I think, is the most important way that you could get involved.
And most of these groups are on Facebook. I don't know what it is about New Hampshire, but we love Facebook. So if you just do a search, and you will find so much content, and that will open up sort of a rabbit hole, and you can just really start to swim in how many people are and groups are out and active right now.
Great. You have a question back at this?
Oh. Hi, I was wondering, on a visionary, innovative level, like, I was thinking about, public library. At some point, this never existed, and someone thought of the idea of this institution, and then that can grow. And, like, of course, a lot of us grew up with no Facebook. Like, it didn't exist, and now it's such a reality. So I guess I'm wondering, we heard a lot about the political process and that way of getting involved, but are you thinking, or have you seen, of innovative kind of forms or structures, or, what are the new forms we need for the values that we're talking about here? It's kind of a creative question, but.
I think it's interesting with technology. The more advanced we become, the more I think we start to shift back to what we might call analog, right? We have all this tech to stay in communication, but there's nothing more powerful than being in a room with another person. And we have all these ways to video chat and Zoom call and do this, but, like, God, I'll tell you, I love a good phone call, to be able to just hear someone's voice and not have to have that fatigue of being on video. So I do think that there's many creative ways that we can stay engaged with each other, we can stay connected with each other, but I would honestly say that really there's no substitute for that one-on-one interaction, for that in-person interaction. But I think we can use technology to our benefit to create these sort of hybrid platforms, these ways of still being able to connect with people who are across the country, or people who are maybe disabled, who can't be with us in person but still want to be involved, to people who are across the world. And so using those things to enhance our ability to connect with one another, to be able to create graphics, to be able to create art that can be shared quickly, widely. But I think it's so important for us to use that tech to enhance and support, but to always kind of go back to what do we need to do to be connected with each other, to see each other, to be able to be in physical space with one another when we can, because there's just something so synergistic and so energetic about human beings when we get together, that what we can create, what we can brainstorm is incredible. And I'll just quickly say, my mother, when she first came to the United States, was struck by the fact that people live indoors so much, that we interact and we live inside of buildings. You want to talk about boxes, we stay inside. And I think that culturally for us in New Hampshire, we're much more comfortable with sort of a much more rigid and structured way of interacting with one another. And she was used to back in Congo where people are outside. People, you go home to eat, to sleep, to wash, but you're outside, you're with people, you're exploring together, you see people in the park, being literally out on the grass and on the ground. And so I think that because technology enables us to connect, but it also enables us to disconnect. And we need to find ways to use that technology, but always come back to how do we get closer to each other. And I think especially after the pandemic, we're still kind of making our way back to each other. But in addition to the sort of cultural norms of New Hampshire, there's a lot of discomfort in that. And I think if we can find ways to come together, include food, song, music, art, ways of being able to express and connect with each other, then the technology just makes that even more delicious.
Yeah. I guess just to add to that, I have thought about that a little bit. So I think a lot about third spaces. So right, you have your home, and then you have your work, and then you have that other space that you can go. Right, the public library is a great example. You can come here for free. You can sit in a booth. You can read a book, pull a book off the shelf. You could check it out, take it home. But this place, you can exist here for free. It doesn't cost you any money. Yeah. And so I think that a lot of the time when we're trying to innovate, I think that we oftentimes forget about maintaining what we already have. Mm-hmm. And so, right, I'm sure that it's a struggle to keep the lights on in the public library here in Nashua, right? I'm sure that they have to go to the city council and fight for funding to be able to buy new books, to buy new computers. So I think that, yes, we should be innovative, and yes, we should be thinking about creating these third spaces, creating places where you can enjoy art and food and community, but also recognizing the places that we can already do that and making sure that we're funding those properly and that they're maintained.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The only thing I have to add to that is that Peterborough had the first taxpayer-funded public library in the country. And so I know that the institution, and my library trustee would be very upset if I didn't mention that, the institution of the public library is very important, and I don't have much else to add other than I don't think we can innovate any further than we already have. We have the public libraries, we have the town meetings, which is arguably the most democratic system in the country. We get together and we vote on the warrant articles, which will be outlining the law for our town. And I'm always surprised. We were just at the first deliberative session, and I go, and there was maybe 75 people there. Peterborough usually has a packed room. We have to engage with what's happening at our local level, because that's the structure in which which road is paved, how our school's getting funded. That's the stuff that matters. So it's getting our neighbors together. It's working on a local level and getting together in person. I think is more powerful than anything that we can do online.
So we have time for one last question.
Thank you. There's a line that I heard a long time ago about why do you beat your head against a wall? Because it feels so good when you stop. One of the non-joys about being a legislator is realizing that there are people whose views are so far apart from your own that the likelihood of finding common ground becomes near impossible. And one of the ways to do that is to find something that has nothing to do with legislation and get common ground with them there. But I personally have gotten to a point of saying, if there's someone whose belief about not providing free lunches for poor children boils down to, they're not my children, why should I care? Which a legislator said to me a week and a half ago. How do you suggest trying to get to find common ground with them? Because at this point, my belief for myself is I'm going to spend time trying to find common ground with people who might be persuadable rather than spending my time with people whose beliefs I can't support in any way, shape, or form.
I'll go first. So one of the tactics that organizers use is deep canvassing. And it's the idea that through deep conversations, we can find that place of commonality with people who are very diametrically opposed to where we're coming from. There is a recognition that, people fall on a spectrum. Most people fall somewhere like, they may not be really on board, but they're willing to listen. And then, you have the far ends of people who, for the most part, they're not going to change their mind. It doesn't matter what you say. And sometimes it's not worth it to beat your head against a wall. I think it's a little bit easier said than done when you're working directly with those kinds of folks. I have found that in my experience that using some aspects of deep canvassing is helpful. It does take a lot of sort of like bracing my own self to be like, okay, I am going to hold this space with this person. I'm going to sort of take care of myself emotionally for as I need, and sort of just find a way to kind of find an area. Like, can we agree on anything? It doesn't matter if we're not necessarily agreeing on the very specific thing in which the conversation is about, but can we find anything in common? And I'll just share a quick one of how I had a conversation with a gentleman who was very anti-vaxxer. He was a very virulent anti-vaxxer, and I was in a car with him because he was my Uber driver, and I couldn't leave. And so I decided in that moment, for my own safety and just to experiment, to see, okay, can I find a place of commonality with this person? And the place of commonality that we came to is that he cared about his family, that the decisions he was making was coming from a place of care for his family, and that we could agree that we both care for our family. Right? And so I think that it may not mean that that person changes their mind in that moment, but what I have seen over and over again is if you are willing, if you have the spoons, the bandwidth to have those deep conversations in an ongoing way as well, especially as we're talking about working with colleagues, and so you are able to say what you believe, but you leave enough space to hear from them, and you find anything. It could be the smallest granule. You love your granddaughter? I love my granddaughter. Okay. You like your granddaughter to eat? I like my granddaughter to eat. So maybe we should make it possible for them to eat. But let's just think about that. So, but just really finding something small, because I think it is really, we come from a culture where we throw people away. And we show up, and when I'm thinking about abolition, we talked about this, abolition is not just ending prisons and jails. It's also, what does abolition look like in our own lives, right? It's like, if I truly believe of myself as an abolitionist that I'm not going to throw anybody away, even if you frustrate me and I just want to but I'm not going to. I will find something, anything. And that rapport, that connection does have an impact. And you may not see it then. You may not see it tomorrow. You may not see it next month. But I promise you, something in them will shift. As something in you will shift as well. Because I think we're wired towards each other's humanity, even though our culture very much keeps us all kind of bubbled away from each other. But I think if you have, like I said, if you have the bandwidth, the patience to have those conversations, and to just keep working, find one small granule, then a little cup, and then a bigger box, it really will make a difference.
Okay.
I agree with that, Representative Elberger, and I have to say, we had the Crown Act in the biennium before I joined the legislature, and they treated Representative DiLorenzo horribly, and they failed that legislation. But when we go, we talk to them, I got that bill through 17-2, and then onto the consent calendar, and we're going to pass that bill through the state Senate. The same thing with cannabis annulments legislation, which was in prior years tough to pass, very hard to pass through both parties. But when you approach it respectfully and carefully, and you don't assume that you know better than anyone else, and you listen to people's questions, that legislation passed, what was it? It was 14-6 through our committee, and then 283-80 on the House floor. It's things like that prove to me, like what Representative Key's question was, if we can operate outside of the box, if we can treat people with respect and operate civilly, then on issues like feeding the kids or raising the minimum wage or making sure that we have labor protections for our unions here, or making sure that the waste management companies aren't polluting our lakes up in the North Country with toxic, cancerous materials. That if we stand not just with the intestinal fortitude of politicians who have principles willing to actually stand for those, to protect our environment, to protect our people, to protect labor rights in this state, and to make sure that we have a state that works for all of us and not just the few. Support of 20% of Trump supporters. I think you'd be calling yourself crazy, but we saw that happen in the last two primary elections with a Jewish man named Senator Bernie Sanders. And whatever our opinions on him is, I think we can agree that he spoke his truth, his honesty. He had principles, and he was unafraid and unabashed to stand up for them. I think if we want to win people back, if we want to restore that sense of civility, then we're going to have to operate equally with those principles, equally with truth and respect and honesty, and that's what people like Senator Sanders and Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King and name it, Angela Davis, Harvey Key, people who have stood strong for their entire lives. That's what they've done, and I think that they would agree that we just need to treat people with respect, and eventually we'll get them to agree on that level. And that's happened in the federal Congress. They've agreed on other things and such like that. So, thank you.
So you guys good? Yeah. Okay. I have a question. Does everyone here know what the Crown Act is?
The Crown Act bans hair-based. Thank you, Linda. Actually.
Yeah.
Thank you. The Crown Act bans hair-based discrimination here in the state. I faced that in my job. I was fired for growing my hair out a little bit longer, even though I kept it up. It wasn't even as long as it is now. It was much less longer. People in our state, in the schools, in all across the state, do face hair-based discrimination. It's not, we don't have a million cases of this, but there are enough to where this is a problem. And states like Alabama, states across our country have passed this legislation, and it's time that New Hampshire joins. So.
Great. So one last plug, and this is for the library here. I must honestly say that Nashua Library continuously have forums similar to this. We actually do Frederick Douglass here every year, as well as part of the Black Heritage Trail. The Nashua Library has always been very supportive of the community and bringing different programs and things in. So I'm just going to recommend that wherever you may live, that you actually reach out to your libraries as well, because I think pretty much across the state, folks are trying to do the right thing when it comes to getting together in settings like this. That's my little spill.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Linda Gathright, and thank you, audience. And I want to just again ask you to applaud our panelists, this group of innovative youth. We usually try to sum up what you've heard, but I think there's enough richness that we heard that you can all sum it up for yourself. I will just say the one thing that you can take away that all of these panelists talked about was our individual responsibility, whether we want to get involved or whether we want to learn for ourselves to see what it's about. We at the Trail believe that if we can reach or engage 400,000 New Hampshire residents in conversations like this, we have a chance to create sustainable change in our state. And so you are part of that 400,000. We thank you for being here, engaging in this dialogue, and we hope to see you at some of our events. See us in Juneteenth in where we we're in Manchester as well for some of our celebration. And we have tours all over the state. So join us in learning this history. And we believe having these conversations, knowing this history breaks down the stereotypes of who we think we are as individuals, as a collective, as a group. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time as we continue these dialogues.